The dust never settled in Willow Creek. It hung in the air like a veil between the living and the forgotten, coating everything in a fine layer of rust-colored earth. The town itself seemed carved from the same dust, its weathered buildings leaning against each other like old men sharing secrets, founded 30 years back by prospectors who'd found more disappointment than gold. It had become a way station for those heading somewhere else, anywhere else. Eliza Moore wiped her hands on her apron, leaving streaks of flour across the faded blue fabric. Through the grimy window of Morrison's Inn, she watched the evening sun paint the distant mountains the color of dried blood. The kitchen was her domain, a narrow room that smelled perpetually of wood smoke and yesterday's stew. She'd been here 3 years now, ever since Thomas died of the fever that took half the town that terrible winter. "Eliza, where's that cornbread?" Old Morrison's voice cracked like a whip from the dining room. "Coming," she called back, though her voice barely carried. It had been getting quieter lately, as if she were slowly fading into the background of life, becoming part of the furniture like the scarred tables and rickety chairs. She pulled the pan from the oven, the heat washing over her face. At 32, she felt ancient. The mirror above the wash basin showed a woman with brown hair pulled severely back, gray already threading through at the temples. Her hands, once soft enough to embroider silk, were now rough as tree bark from lye soap and endless scrubbing. The dining room buzzed with the usual crowd drovers, drifters, and the handful of permanent residents who called Willow Creek home. They looked through her as she set down plates, their eyes sliding past as if she were made of air. Only their complaints landed: solid meat too tough, coffee too weak, bread too dry. "Widow Moore." Jake Henley slurred from his corner table, already deep in his cups, though the sun hadn't fully set. "You ever think about getting yourself another husband? Man needs more than grief to keep him warm at night." The other men chuckled, a sound like coyotes circling. Eliza kept her face blank, a skill she'd perfected. She'd learned that responding only made it worse. Better to be invisible, to move through their world like a ghost. "Leave her be, Jake," muttered Sam, the telegraph operator, not out of kindness. Eliza knew, but because he wanted his dinner in peace. She retreated to the kitchen, her sanctuary, through the back door. She could see her small garden, struggling against the alkaline soil. The tomatoes were stunted, the beans sparse. Like everything in Willow Creek, they seemed to be just barely holding on. The evening wore on in its familiar pattern. She served. She cleaned. She endured. The men talked around her about cattle prices, about the railroad that might come through, about the Apache raids to the south. Their world was large and full of consequence. Hers had shrunk to these four walls, to the rhythm of meals and dishes and the hollow ache where Thomas used to be. As the crowd thinned, she allowed herself a moment at the back step. The air had cooled, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain that would never reach them. A coyote called from the hills, answered by another. Even they had companions. "Are you planning to stand there all night?" Morrison appeared beside her, his bulk filling the doorway. He wasn't unkind, exactly, just indifferent. She was useful, and that was all that mattered. "Got paying customers still need tending." "Yes, Mr. Morrison." Back inside, she found Doc Winters at his usual table, the only man in town who ever really looked at her. His eyes were kind but tired, holding too much knowledge of human frailty. "Evening, Eliza," he said, glancing up from his week-old newspaper. "How are you keeping?" "Well enough." She poured his coffee, steady-handed despite her exhaustion. "Thomas would be proud," he said quietly. "The way you've carried on." She stiffened slightly. People rarely mentioned Thomas anymore, as if death were contagious. He'd have expected nothing less. Doc Winters studied her with those knowing eyes. Expecting and deserving are two different things. Before she could respond, not that she would have the door banged open, Charlie Moss stumbled in, bringing the smell of the stables with him. "Hey, Widow Moore," he called out, though she stood mere feet away. "Heard tell you make the best pie in the territory. How about you make me one special, I'll make it worth your while." His leer suggested his idea of payment had nothing to do with money. "Kitchen's closed for pie," she said evenly. "Now that ain't neighborly." He stepped closer, whiskey fumes preceding him. "Maybe you need someone to teach you some manners." Doc Winters half rose from his chair, but Eliza was already moving, slipping sideways with practiced ease, putting the counter between them. She'd learned to navigate drunk men like a boat through rapids, never direct confrontation, always evasion. Morrison appeared from the back room, drawn by the prospect of trouble. "Charlie, you pay for your meal and get on out. We're closing up." Charlie grumbled, but tossed some coins on the counter, their clatter sharp in the sudden silence, as the door slammed behind him. Eliza began clearing tables, her movements automatic. "One of these days," Doc Winters said softly, "someone ought to remind these boys what civilization means." "Civilization?" Morrison snorted. "This far from anywhere. We make our own rules. And the first rule is everybody minds their own business." The doctor left soon after, pressing a silver dollar into Eliza's hand, far too much for coffee and stew. She tried to give it back, but he was already gone, disappearing into the darkness that swallowed Willow Creek whole each night. Alone in the kitchen, she counted the day's earnings. After Morrison's cut and what she owed at the general store, there'd be enough for another week. Maybe 2, if she was careful. Thomas's dream of California seemed further away than ever. He'd promised her orange groves and ocean breezes, a place where the dust couldn't reach. Now that dream was buried with him in the cemetery on the hill, marked by a wooden cross that would likely outlast her. She banked the fire, checked the locks, and climbed the narrow stairs to her room. It wasn't much a bed, a washstand, a trunk that held everything she owned. On the small table sat her one luxury, a daguerreotype of Thomas, his serious face forever frozen in youth. "Another day done," she whispered to the image, a ritual that brought no comfort but seemed necessary nonetheless. Outside her window, Willow Creek settled into sleep. Somewhere a dog barked, answered by another. The saloon down the street still leaked light and laughter, but that was a world apart from hers. She was the woman who cooked and cleaned, who existed in the margins of other people's lives. The town needed her services, but not her presence. She was necessary, but not wanted, like the bitter medicine Doc Winters prescribed. As she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the building creak and settle, Eliza allowed herself to imagine another life, one where she mattered beyond her usefulness, where someone might look at her and see more than the Widow Moore, more than hands that could scrub and serve. But imagination was a luxury she couldn't afford. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, more dust, more dishes, more invisibility. The moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light through her window. In that light, even Willow Creek looked almost beautiful, transformed into something otherworldly. But Eliza knew better. Come morning, the dust would return, settling over everything like a burial shroud, and she would rise to meet another day of being forgotten. In the distance, a lone rider might have been approaching on the trail from the south, but Eliza was already asleep, dreaming of orange blossoms she would never smell and waves she would never see. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday morning, when the heat was already building despite the early hour. Eliza first saw him through the kitchen window as she kneaded bread dough, her arms deep in the rhythm of push and fold. He rode a bay mare that had seen better days, her coat dusty and ribs showing beneath worn leather. The man himself seemed cut from the same cloth as his horse, lean, weathered, built for endurance rather than show. He dismounted slowly, like a man who'd been in the saddle too long, and stood for a moment surveying Willow Creek. Something in his stillness caught her attention. Most men who rode into town came with purpose supplies to buy, whiskey to drink, trouble to make. This one simply stood, as if taking the measure of the place, or perhaps letting it take the measure of him. James Rowe, though she didn't know his name yet, led his horse to the water trough outside Morrison's. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with premature silver, and splashed water on his face. When he straightened, their eyes met through the window for just a moment. His were the color of winter sky, gray-blue and distant. He nodded once, a gesture so small she might have imagined it, then turned away. The breakfast crowd was thin just Doc Winters, Sam from the telegraph office, and 2 drovers passing through. Eliza served them mechanically, but her awareness kept pulling toward the door. When it finally opened and the stranger entered, the room seemed to shift, like the air before a storm. He chose a table in the corner, back to the wall, a cautious man's choice. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the kind carved by sun and wind and things harder to name. His clothes were plain but clean, his gun worn but well-maintained. Everything about him spoke of careful competence, of a man who'd learned not to waste motion or words. "Morning," she said, approaching with the coffee pot. "Ma'am." His voice was low, roughened by trail dust. "Coffee'd be welcome. Breakfast, too, if you're serving." "Beef hash, eggs, biscuits." "That'll do fine." She poured his coffee, noting the steadiness of his hands, the way he wrapped them around the cup as if drawing warmth from it despite the rising heat. There was something different about his silence, not dismissive like most men's, but attentive. He watched everything without seeming to, cataloging exits and faces with an economy of movement. "New in town," Sam called over, always eager for gossip to feed down the telegraph lines. "Passing through," the stranger replied without looking up. "Heading where?" "Haven't decided yet." Sam waited for more, but none came. The stranger Rowe had effectively ended the conversation without rudeness, a skill Eliza recognized and envied. She brought his food, set it down quietly. He nodded his thanks, ate with the same deliberate efficiency that marked all his movements. The morning wore on. Other customers came and went, but Rowe remained, nursing his coffee, his presence both unobtrusive and somehow significant. When Jake Henley stumbled in, already seeking his liquid breakfast, Rowe's eyes tracked him briefly, cataloging and dismissing in one smooth assessment. Well, Jake slurred, spotting fresh prey. "Don't believe I've had the pleasure. Stranger, Jake Henley's the name, and this here's my town." "Is that so?" Rowe's tone was mild, but Eliza caught something underneath it, like bedrock beneath sand. "Sure enough, been here since the beginning. Could tell you stories about every soul in Willow Creek." Jake's eyes found Eliza, and his grin turned mean. "Take the widow there. Husband died owing half the town money. She's working it off one plate at a time. Ain't that right, darlin'?" Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could retreat to the kitchen, Rowe spoke. "Seems to me a woman who works hard deserves respect, not gossip." The words were quiet, but they carried. Jake's face flushed darker. "You telling me how to talk in my own town?" "No." Rowe took a sip of coffee. "Just observing that a man's character shows in how he treats those who serve him." The tension stretched taut. Jake's hand twitched toward his hip, but something in Rowe's stillness suggested that would be a mistake. After a long moment, Jake laughed, ugly and forced. "You're right. Stranger. No harm meant." He turned to Eliza with exaggerated courtesy. "My apologies. Widow Moore. Now how about that whiskey?" "Bar's next door," Morrison said from the doorway, having materialized at the scent of trouble. "We don't serve liquor with breakfast." Jake left, muttering. The room exhaled collectively. Rowe finished his coffee as if nothing had happened, but when Eliza came to clear his plate, he met her eyes directly. "Thank you for breakfast, ma'am. Best I've had in some time." "You're welcome." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And thank you." "No need. Man should mind his manners." He left money on the table, exact change plus a modest but respectable tip, and headed for the door. Through the window, she watched him tend his horse with gentle hands, checking hooves and adjusting the saddle. The animal leaned into his touch, trust evident in every line of her body. "Who was that?" Morrison asked, counting the coins. "I didn't give a name." Gunfighter, maybe, had that look." Eliza said nothing, but she thought Morrison was wrong. She'd seen gunfighters before, men who wore violence like cologne, eager to prove themselves. This man wore his competence like old leather, broken in and unremarkable until you needed it. The stranger she'd learned his name was Rowe when he signed for a room at the boarding house became a fixture over the following days. He appeared each morning for breakfast. Same table, same quiet courtesy. He spent his days at odd jobs around town, helping the blacksmith with a difficult horse, repairing misses, Chen's fence, splitting wood for the church. He worked without fuss, accepted payment without haggling, and somehow managed to be present without being intrusive. The town, naturally suspicious of outsiders, began to relax around him. He drank little, gambled not at all, and showed no interest in the working girls at the saloon. His greatest oddity, in their eyes, was the way he treated everyone with the same measured respect, from Morrison down to old Miguel, who swept out the stables. For Eliza, his presence became a fixed point in her days. Unlike the others, he saw her not in any improper way. He was unfailingly polite, but he acknowledged her existence beyond her function. He thanked her by name, noticed when she changed the flowers on the tables, commented on the quality of her cooking with specific appreciation. "That sage in the biscuits," he said one morning, "reminds me of home." "Where's home?" she asked, then caught herself. She'd learned not to ask personal questions. But he didn't seem to mind. "Texas originally. Little place near the Brazos. Haven't been back in years." Family. Once. The single word carried weight, a door closing gently but firmly. She understood. Some losses were too large for words. As the days passed, she noticed other things. The way he positioned himself to watch the room, but also the kitchen door, as if keeping track of her movements. How he timed his meals to avoid the rowdiest crowds. The small repairs around the inn that appeared overnight. A loose board nailed down. A squeaky hinge oiled that she suspected were his doing, though he never mentioned them. One evening, as she hauled water from the well, she found him there. "Allow me," he said, taking the bucket before she could protest. They walked back in companionable silence. But at the kitchen door, he paused. "This town," he said slowly, "doesn't see what it has." She looked up at him, startled by the intensity in his quiet voice. "Some things," he continued, "are worth more than gold. Steady hands, honest work, kindness when none is required." He set the bucket down carefully. "Just thought someone should say it." Before she could respond, he touched his hat and was gone, leaving her standing in the doorway with her heart beating strangely fast and words she couldn't speak crowding her throat. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, Eliza found herself thinking not of Thomas or California or the endless dust, but of gray-blue eyes that saw too much and hands gentle enough to calm a spooked horse. It was foolish, she told herself. He was passing through, like all the others. Soon enough, Willow Creek would be just another town on his back trail. But the next morning, he was there at his corner table, and when he smiled just slightly at her approach with the coffee pot, she felt something she'd thought buried with Thomas, the dangerous stirring of hope. The first true collision came on a Saturday night when the saloon crowd spilled over into Morrison's. Eliza had learned to navigate these nights like a ship's captain through rough waters. Keep moving, avoid eye contact, never let them corner you. But tonight felt different, charged with the kind of electricity that preceded summer storms. Jake Henley held court at the big table, flush from a lucky hand at cards and generous with his winnings, at least when it came to buying rounds. His voice boomed across the dining room, each story growing larger with the telling. "Course, the widow Moore knows all about luck running out," he said, catching sight of her. "Her Thomas thought he'd struck it rich with that claim up Copper Creek. Borrowed from half the town to work it. How much did he owe when the fever took him? Darlin' enough that you'll be washing dishes till you're gray." The room laughed, ugly and sharp. Eliza kept her face still, her hands steady as she cleared plates. She'd heard worse, but from his corner table, James Rowe set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Seems to me," he said, voice carrying without being raised, "a man who speaks ill of the dead lacks the courage to face the living." The laughter died. Jake's face darkened, whiskey courage making him bold. "You got something to say about courage, Drifter?" "Just an observation." Rowe hadn't moved, hadn't even shifted in his chair, but something in his stillness drew every eye. "Takes a special kind of yellow to mock a widow's grief for entertainment." "Yellow!" Jake lurched to his feet, hand hovering near his gun. "You calling me yellow?" "I'm calling you boring." Rowe's tone was almost conversational. Any fool can run his mouth when he's got an audience. Question is, what's he worth when the show's over? Morrison stepped forward, ever mindful of his furniture. "Gentlemen, perhaps—" "Shut up, Morrison." Jake's eyes never left Rowe. "This between me and the stranger, unless he's all talk too." Rowe stood slowly, like water rising. "I'll be outside. You can finish your meal first if you need to gather your nerve." He walked out without hurry, without looking back. The room held its breath. Jake stood frozen, caught between pride and the sudden, cold realization that he might have miscalculated. His friend's eyes on him made the choice. "Nobody calls Jake Henley yellow," he muttered, and followed. Eliza found herself moving toward the window, along with half the room. In the street, Rowe stood relaxed, hands loose at his sides. Jake faced him 20 feet away, swaying slightly. "You sure about this?" Rowe asked. "No shame in walking away from whiskey talk." "Draw! You son of a—" Jake's hand jerked toward his gun. He was still fumbling with the holster when Rowe's weapon appeared. Smooth as thought. The crack of the shot made everyone jump, everyone except Rowe, who stood steady as stone. Jake's gun flew from his hand, spinning into the dirt. He clutched his wrist, face white with shock and pain. Rowe holstered his weapon in the same fluid motion. "Your wrist is bruised, not broken," he said calmly. "Doc Winters can wrap it. Next time you feel like entertainment, try the piano." He turned to walk back inside, but stopped at the sight of faces pressed to every window. Something flickered across his features. Regret, maybe, or resignation. Instead of entering, he touched his hat and headed toward the boarding house, leaving Jake cradling his hand and the town buzzing like a kicked hive. Eliza retreated to the kitchen, hands shaking as she gripped the counter. She'd seen gunplay before it was as much a part of frontier life as dust and disappointment. But this had been different. Rowe hadn't wanted the fight, had tried to avoid it. The speed of his draw, the precision of his shot, these spoke of long practice, hard-earned skill. Yet he'd used only enough force to disarm, not to kill. Who was James Rowe? The question followed her through the evening cleanup. Morrison was unusually quiet, calculating no doubt what this meant for business. The other customers spoke in hushed voices, already embellishing the story. By tomorrow, it would have grown into legend. She was banking the fire when a soft knock came at the kitchen door. Her heart kicked, but it was only Doc Winters. "Wanted to check you're all right," he said. "That was unpleasant business." "I'm fine." She wiped her hands on her apron. "How's Jake?" "Nursing wounded pride more than his wrist. He'll live." The doctor studied her with those knowing eyes. "Our Mr. Rowe is an interesting fellow." "I suppose. That kind of skill doesn't come from nowhere. Man's either lawman or outlaw. Or was once." "Does it matter?" The question came out sharper than intended. Doc Winters smiled slightly. Not to me. Man saved my horse last week noticed she was favoring her leg before I did. That speaks to character more than fast guns. He paused at the door. Just be careful. Eliza, sometimes the most dangerous men are the gentle ones. They've got more to prove. After he left, she finished her chores mechanically, but sleep wouldn't come. She kept seeing Roe's face in that moment before he'd drawn calm, almost sad, like a man doing necessary work he took no pleasure in. Near midnight, she gave up and crept downstairs for water. A figure on the back step made her gasp. Sorry. Roe rose quickly. Didn't mean to startle you. Couldn't sleep. Neither could I. She hesitated, then sat beside him. Propriety be damned. The night was cool, stars thick as spilled salt across the sky. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Bringing trouble to your workplace. You didn't bring it. Jake's been trouble since before you arrived. Still, violence follows some men. Thought I'd left it behind, but... He shrugged, a gesture eloquent in its resignation. Why did you stand up for me? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my mother was a widow. After my father died, I watched men treat her like she was less than nothing. Too young to do anything about it then. His voice roughened. Guess I'm making up for lost time. They sat in companionable silence, the town quiet around them. Somewhere a dog barked, answered by coyotes in the hills. The familiar sounds seemed different with him beside her, less lonely somehow. I should go, he said eventually. Not proper, us sitting here. Since when has Willow Creek cared about property? He almost smiled. Since a widow's reputation is all she's got. He was right, of course. She stood, but before going inside, touched his shoulder lightly. Thank you for earlier. He caught her hand briefly, his touch warm and calloused. Don't thank me for doing what any decent man should. But as she lay in bed again, Eliza knew that wasn't true. Plenty of men had witnessed Jake's cruelty over the years. Only one had stood against it. The next morning, Roe wasn't at his usual table. The absence felt like a missing tooth, wrong and noticeable. She served the other customers mechanically, deflecting questions about last night with practiced vagueness. But her eyes kept returning to the empty corner. He appeared near noon, coming not through the front but the kitchen door, arms full of split wood. Noticed your pile was running low, he said, stacking it neatly by the stove. Mr. Morrison usually. Morrison's busy. He straightened, brushing bark from his shirt. Besides, seemed like a good day to be useful. She understood. After last night, the town would be watching him differently, waiting to see if he was trouble. By doing simple chores, he was trying to show them another side. Are you hungry? I saved some stew. I'd be grateful. She served him at the small table in the kitchen. Away from curious eyes, he ate slowly, thoughtfully. I'll be moving on soon, he said suddenly. Few more days, maybe a week. Her hand stilled on the dish she was drying. I see. It's better that way, for everyone. She nodded, though something in her chest tightened. Of course he would leave. Men like him didn't settle in places like Willow Creek. They passed through, leaving ripples that eventually smoothed back to nothing. But over the next days, he didn't leave. Instead, he seemed to embed himself deeper in the town's rhythm. He helped raise a barn at the Olson place, fixed the church's leaking roof, spent hours gentling a wild colt everyone else had given up on. His quiet competence began to override the memory of his fast gun. Even Jake, arm in a sling, gave him a wide berth without open hostility. And each morning, he was back at his corner table, watching the room and her with those winter sky eyes. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't read, part longing, part regret, all of it carefully controlled. One evening, as she struggled with a heavy pot, he appeared without being asked. Let me... Together they carried it to the stove, and for a moment they stood close, her hand still on the handle beside his. She could smell leather and soap, see the fine lines around his eyes. Her heart did strange things in her chest. "Eliza," he said softly, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. "Don't," she stepped back, shaking her head. "Don't say whatever you're thinking. Not if you're leaving." He nodded slowly, accepting the boundary. But the space between them remained charged, full of words unspoken and possibilities unexplored. That night, as she walked to her room, she found something on her doorstep, a small carved wooden horse, detailed and delicate. No note, but she knew those careful hands. She held it to the lamplight, tracing the tiny features with one finger, and allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, a different life, one where gentle men stayed, where skill with a gun meant protection instead of danger, where widows could have second chances at happiness. But morning would come, as it always did, with its dust and demands, and James Rowe would leave, as she'd always known he would. The carved horse would remain, a reminder that kindness could exist even in hard places, even if it couldn't last. The boy appeared on the coldest night of autumn, when frost painted the windows and breath came out in clouds. Eliza found him huddled behind the woodpile, knees drawn to his chest, thin shoulders shaking. In the moonlight, she could make out dark hair matted with dirt, clothes more holes than fabric. "Child," she whispered, keeping her voice soft as she would with a spooked colt. "What are you doing out here?" Eyes too large for his face turned toward her, dark, wary, old beyond their years. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, though hunger had a way of stunting growth. He didn't speak, just watched her with the careful attention of something wild. "You must be freezing. Come inside. Let me get you something warm." She reached out slowly, but he flinched back, pressing deeper into the shadows. Her heart twisted. She recognized that look she'd seen it in the mirror after Thomas died, that bone-deep wariness of kindness that might be snatched away. "All right," she said, settling back on her heels. "You stay there. I'll bring something out." She returned with a bowl of stew and bread, still warm from supper, set it down between them like an offering, then retreated a few steps. The boy watched her, watched the food, hunger warring with caution. Finally, hunger won. He grabbed the bowl, eating with desperate efficiency, eyes never leaving her face. "What's your name?" she asked when he'd slowed down. No answer. Maybe he didn't have one, or maybe words were a luxury he couldn't afford. She'd seen it before children who'd been alone so long they'd forgotten how to speak to people. "I'm Eliza. This is Morrison's Inn. You can sleep in the kitchen tonight, by the stove. It's warm." Something crashed inside Morrison's voice, raised in irritation. The boy tensed, ready to bolt. "Wait." She made a quick decision. "The shed out back. There's clean straw, horse blankets, warmer than here, and quieter." Understanding flickered in those dark eyes. He knew about places where loud voices meant danger, where visibility meant vulnerability. She led him to the shed, showed him the corner where she sometimes retreated when the world became too much. He curled up in the straw like a small animal, still clutching the empty bowl. "I'll check on you in the morning," she promised. But when dawn came, the shed was empty. Only the bowl remained, washed clean in the water trough, a gesture of thanks that made her throat tight. She thought that was the end of it, another soul passing through, another story without resolution. She was wrong. That evening, as she scattered feed for the chickens, she caught movement by the fence. The boy was back, watching from what he clearly thought was a safe distance. She pretended not to notice, going about her chores while leaving the kitchen door open. Sure enough, when she returned, half a loaf of bread had vanished from the counter. In its place sat 3 fresh eggs, still warm. It became a pattern. Food disappeared, never much, never more than she could spare. In exchange, Small offerings appeared, eggs from who knew where, wild onions from the hills. Once a rabbit already cleaned and ready for the pot. The boy had become her ghost, present but invisible, surviving on the edges of her generosity. Others noticed. Of course, nothing stayed secret long in Willow Creek. "You're feeding that wild brat," Morrison accused one morning. "Don't deny it. Sarah Chen saw him near your garden." "He's a child." "He's a thief. Ben Watson's missing chickens. The Olsons lost a blanket off their line. That boy's nothing but trouble." "He's hungry. Not our problem." Morrison's face was hard. "Times are lean for everyone. We can't be taking in every stray that wanders through. You keep feeding him, he'll keep coming back. Then what? We supposed to raise every abandoned whelp in the territory?" She said nothing, but that night she left out extra food, and in the morning found the shed occupied again. The boy had crept back under cover of darkness. This time, he didn't run when she appeared. "Breakfast," she offered. He nodded. "Just barely. Progress." She brought it to the shed rather than risk Morrison's wrath. Sat at a careful distance while he ate, not trying to talk, just being present. Trust. She'd learned. Couldn't be forced. It had to be built like a fire, one small stick at a time. James Rowe found them there an hour later. The boy scrambled back at his appearance, but Rowe just leaned against the doorframe, making himself smaller. "Friend of yours?" he asked Eliza. "Getting there." He studied the child with that cataloging gaze, taking in the worn clothes, the defensive posture, the strategic position near the back exit. Traveling alone. The boy's chin lifted defiant, proud. Alone was better than whatever he'd left behind. "Brave," Rose said, and something in his tone made the boy look again. "Also dangerous. Winter's coming." "I told him he could use the shed." Eliza said, "Morrison, no. Morrison doesn't care what happens out here, long as it doesn't affect his profits." Rowe considered this, then reached into his pocket. The boy tensed, but Rowe just pulled out a folding knife, worn but well-maintained, set it on the ground between them. "Man needs a good knife," he said simply, "for work, whittling, protection if it comes to that. You know how to use one." The boy shook his head. "I could teach you, if you're interested." For the first time, Eliza saw something besides wariness in the child's eyes. Hope, maybe, or just the recognition that here was someone who understood the currency of survival. The lessons began that afternoon. Rowe was patient, showing the boy how to hold the knife, how to keep it sharp, how to cut away from himself. The child was a quick study, hands steady despite their thinness, and slowly, carefully, words began to emerge. His name was Tommy. He'd come from back east. How far? He wasn't sure. His parents were gone. That's all he would say. And neither Eliza nor Rowe pushed for more. Some stories were better left untold. As days passed, the boy became a strange bridge between them. He'd work with Rowe in the mornings, learning knots, caring for horses, the 100 small skills that meant survival on the frontier. Afternoons, he'd help Eliza in the garden or kitchen, still wary of the inn's interior, but willing to brave it for her sake. The town, predictably, disapproved. "Bad enough you're feeding him." "Mrs." Watson sniffed. "But letting him run wild with that drifter boy needs discipline, not coddling." "He needs food and safety," Eliza replied, hanging onto her temper by threads. "He needs the orphanage in Fort Worth. That's what charitable institutions are for." Eliza had seen that orphanage, had seen the hollow eyes of children who went in hopeful and came out broken. "He's fine where he is. Living in a shed like an animal, associating with God knows what kind of people, Mrs." Watson's eyes cut meaningfully toward where Rowe was teaching Tommy to mend a harness. "That's no life for a Christian child. Seems more Christian than sending him away to strangers." "Mrs." Watson left in a huff, but Eliza knew it wouldn't end there. The town had its ways of dealing with problems that didn't fit their notion of proper. That night, Tommy joined them for supper in the kitchen at first. He ate quietly but steadily, no longer wolfing food like it might disappear. When Morrison appeared in the doorway, the boy froze. "So, this is the stray?" Morrison's eyes were calculating. Boy, that age could work. Sweep floors, haul water, earn his keep instead of stealing it. "He's not," Eliza began. "I'll work." Tommy's voice was thin but determined. "I can work hard." Morrison grunted. "See that you do. And any stealing, you're gone. Understand?" Tommy nodded vigorously. After Morrison left, Roe reached over and ruffled the boy's hair, a gesture so natural it made Eliza's chest ache. "You don't have to," she told Tommy. "I'll keep feeding you regardless." "I want to." His dark eyes were serious. "Want to belong somewhere." The word hung in the air like a prayer. Eliza felt Roe looking at her, felt the weight of unspoken things. They were three souls at the margins, drawn together by chance or providence. The boy seeking safety, the man seeking redemption, the woman seeking what? She didn't know anymore, only that when she watched Roe's patient hands guiding Tommy's, when she saw the boy beginning to smile, something long frozen in her chest began to thaw. But she'd learned not to trust spring in the desert. It could snow in April, freeze in May. Hope was a dangerous thing, more dangerous than guns or gossip, because when it died, and it always died, it took pieces of you with it. Still, that night when she found Tommy asleep in the kitchen, curled by the stove like a cat, she couldn't help but cover him with a blanket. And when Roe appeared in the doorway, drawn by some instinct, they stood together in the dim light, watching the boy breathe. "He reminds me," Roe said quietly, and didn't finish. "I know." They didn't touch, didn't speak more, but something passed between them in that kitchen and understanding. Perhaps they were guardians now, protectors of something fragile. The weight of it settled over them like a vow. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling windows and doors. Winter was coming, and with it the tests that would determine whether this strange, makeshift family could survive. But for now, in the warmth of the kitchen with the boy safe between them, it was enough. The past arrived on a Thursday afternoon, riding a black stallion and wearing expensive leather. Eliza recognized the type before the man even dismounted a cattle buyer, or maybe a land speculator, the kind who dressed for impression rather than work. But it was Roe's reaction that made her blood chill. She'd never seen him truly still before, but now he stood frozen by the water trough, every muscle locked. The stranger tied his horse with elaborate care, taking his time, making a show of it. When he finally turned, his smile was sharp as winter wind. Well, James Roe, or should I say Jim Reardon, hard to keep track of all your names." Roe said nothing, but Tommy, working nearby, caught the tension and edged closer to Eliza. She put a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling him tremble. "Nothing to say to an old friend." The stranger, his coat marked him as prosperous. His manner as dangerous, strolled closer. "Course, last time we met, you were running pretty hard. Tucson, wasn't it? Or was it El Paso?" "State your business, Garrett." Roe's voice was flat, giving nothing. "My business," Garrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Why? I'm here for the same reason as always. Justice. There's paper on you in 3 territories. Jim, dead or alive in 2 of them." The words fell like stones into still water. Eliza felt the ripples spreading, faces appearing in windows, conversations dying mid-sentence. Within minutes, the whole town would know. "That was a long time ago," Roe said quietly. "Not so long that folks have forgotten. That bank in Amarillo, the stage outside Fort Worth, the marshal in—" "Enough." Roe's hand didn't move toward his gun, but Garrett stepped back anyway. "You want to take me in? Try it. Otherwise, move on." "Oh, I'm in no hurry." Garrett's smile widened. "See, I've been tracking you for months. Lost you after that business in Santa Fe. But then I heard rumors. James Rowe, playing honest citizen in a nowhere town. Had to see it for myself. His eyes found Eliza and Tommy, lingering with unpleasant speculation. And what's this, found yourself a ready-made family? How touching. Does the widow know what kind of man she's harboring, does the boy? Tommy pressed closer to Eliza, but his young voice was steady. Mister, James is good. He teaches me things. I'm sure he does. Garrett's tone made even innocent words sound dirty. All kinds of useful skills for a growing boy. How to rob folks, how to run, how to leave bodies behind. Rowe moved then, just a step, but Garrett's hand flew to his gun. Wouldn't want to scare the ladies and children with violence, though from what I hear, that's never stopped you before. Morrison emerged from the inn, drawn by the prospect of drama. What's going on here? Just sharing some history, Garrett said pleasantly. Thought folks should know they've got Jim Reardon in their midst. Man's wanted in 3 territories for robbery and murder. There's $2,000 on his head in Texas alone. The gathered crowd murmured, fear and greed mixing in equal measure. $2,000 was more than most would see in a lifetime. That true, Rowe? Morrison demanded. Rowe's silence was answer enough. Eliza saw something die in his eyes, the quiet hope he'd been nurturing, the possibility of peace. When he looked at her, she read the apology there, the regret. Well, Morrison's voice was hard with betrayal. Seems we've been harboring a fugitive. Now hold on, Doc Winters pushed through the crowd. This man's been nothing but helpful since he arrived. Whatever he was before, he's a killer. Garrett interrupted. Shot down Marshall Webb in cold blood. Left a widow and 3 children. That the kind of helpful you mean? More murmurs. Uglier now. Eliza felt the tide turning. Saw faces that had been neutral or even friendly closing off. Fear was contagious, and Garrett was spreading it like typhoid. I'll leave. Rowe's voice cut through the noise. Tonight, no trouble for anyone. Like hell. Jake Henley appeared, still nursing his wounded pride along with his wrist. There's bounty money at stake, boys. We could split $2,000. You want to try collecting? Rowe asked softly. And Jake paled, remembering that lightning draw. See, Garrett pointed. Threatens honest citizens. This is what you've welcomed into your homes. A snake in sheep's clothing. The only snake I see, Eliza heard herself say, is the one spreading poison with his tongue. Every eye turned to her. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't back down. Mr. Rowe's been nothing but decent since he arrived. He's helped folks, worked honest, never made trouble that wasn't brought to him first. That counts more than old paper and older grudges. Listen to the widow. Garrett's voice dripped condescension. Defending her outlaw lover, though I guess a woman who couldn't keep her own husband alive ain't too particular about. Rowe's gun appeared in his hand so fast Eliza didn't see him draw. The barrel pressed against Garrett's throat, cutting off words and breath. You can say what you want about me, Rowe said, each word precise as a bullet. All of it's probably true, but you speak to her with respect, or I'll give you a new mouth to talk through. The crowd held its breath. Garrett's eyes bulged, but he managed a nod. Rowe held the position a moment longer, then stepped back, holstering his weapon. Get your horse, he said. Ride out. You want me? I'll meet you at dawn, mile north of town. We'll settle it clean. You calling me out? Garrett's bravado was shaken, but not broken. I'm giving you a choice. Take it and ride away breathing, or keep pushing and see what happens. Garrett looked around, seeking support, but found only closed faces. Even Jake wouldn't meet his eyes. The town might fear Rowe now, knowing his past, but they feared him more in this moment, seeing what he could become when cornered. Dawn, Garrett spat. Mile north. And when I kill you, I'll come back for your whore and her brat. This time it was Tommy who moved, the knife Rowe had given him appearing in his small hand. You won't touch Miss Eliza. The sight of the boy, fierce and trembling, ready to defend the only mother he'd known, seemed to break something in the crowd. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. Then the Olsons. Even Jake Henley moved to stand with them. Whatever Roe had been, he was theirs now, part of Willow Creek's ragged fabric. Garrett saw it too. His face twisted. You've all lost your minds. But fine. Dawn it is. He stalked to his horse, mounted with less grace than he'd shown arriving. Enjoy your last night, Reardon or Roe, or whatever lie you're living now. After he rode out, the crowd dispersed slowly, uncertain. Some looked at Roe with fear, others with a kind of wounded confusion. He stood alone in the street, isolated by revelation. Inside, Eliza said firmly, taking Tommy's hand. Both of you, supper's getting cold. In the kitchen, they sat in heavy silence. Tommy picked at his food, struggling to reconcile the man he knew with the outlaw described. Roe stared at his untouched plate. Is it true? The boy finally asked. What he said. Some of it. Roe's voice was tired. I've done things I'm not proud of. Ran with bad men, made worse choices, but... Did you kill that marshal? Roe met the boy's eyes squarely. Yes, though not how Garrett tells it. Webb was corrupt, selling protection to rustlers. When we refused to pay, he came for us. It was him or me. And the robberies? I was young, angry, stupid. Thought the world owed me for what it took. He glanced at Eliza. Took me too long to learn that stealing from others didn't fill the holes in myself. Tommy digested this, then nodded. You're different now. Trying to be. That's what matters. The boy's simple faith was devastating. Miss Eliza taught me that. People can change if they want to bad enough. Eliza's throat tightened. When had this become her family? When had these two broken souls become essential to her breathing? The thought of losing them, of Roe facing Garrett at dawn, of Tommy being sent away, was physically painful. You can't meet him, she said. Take your horse, ride out tonight. He'll follow, and we'll be safe. He won't follow. Roe's smile was sad. Men like Garrett don't chase, they wait and ambush. If I run now, he'll stay here. Use you both as bait. Eventually I'd have to come back, and more people would be hurt. So you'll face him. I'll face him. He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. Whatever happens, know that these weeks, they've been the closest to peace I've found. You and the boy. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Don't talk like you're already dead. I'm not planning to die, but Eliza, he squeezed her hand. If something happens, there's money hidden in my saddlebags. Enough to get you and Tommy somewhere safe. Start fresh. California, maybe. See those orange groves you mentioned? She pulled her hand away. Stop it. Promise me you'll take it. Promise me you'll take care of the boy. Promise me you'll live through tomorrow and take care of us yourself. They stared at each other across the table, everything unsaid crowding the space between them. Tommy looked back and forth, understanding with a child's clarity what the adults couldn't voice. You love each other, he said, wonder in his voice. Like a real family. Roe's face crumpled, just for a moment. Then he stood, ruffled the boy's hair. Get some sleep, partner. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But none of them slept that night. Eliza lay rigid in her bed, listening to every creak and sigh of the building. Somewhere below, she knew Roe was sitting up, preparing, and Tommy she'd checked on him twice, finding him wide-eyed in his makeshift bed, clutching the knife like a talisman. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky the color of dried blood, she rose and went to the kitchen. Roe was there, checking his gun, movements careful and practiced. Don't, she said. He looked up, and everything was in his eyes: love, regret, determination. Take care of our boy. Our boy. The words were a gift and a goodbye. Before she could respond, he was gone, walking out into the gray morning, toward whatever waited a mile north of town. The night Garrett died changed everything, though not in the way anyone expected. It started with torches, their light fracturing the darkness into dancing shadows. Eliza heard them first, voices raised in ugly harmony, boots marching with drunken purpose. She'd been sitting in the kitchen with Tommy, neither able to sleep, both waiting for dawn and whatever it would bring. "Stay here," she told the boy, but he followed her to the window anyway. His small hand found hers as they watched the mob gather in the street. 20 men, maybe more, faces twisted by righteousness and whiskey. Jake Henley led them, chest puffed with borrowed courage. "Rowe or Reardon, or whatever you're calling yourself," Jake's voice cracked on the shout. "Come on out, time to face justice." Morrison appeared in his nightshirt, trying to assert authority. "What's the meaning of this?" "Stand aside, old man." Jake waved a coil of rope. "We're doing what should have been done the minute we learned the truth. No outlaws in our town, no killers walking free among decent folk." "He said he'd meet Garrett at dawn." "And give him a chance to run or worse. Gun down more innocent men." Jake spat. "That's not justice. This is—" Eliza's blood turned cold. She knew that rope, knew what it meant. Lynch law. They called it justice without judges, execution without trial. She'd seen it once before, years back. The memory still visited her nightmares. "Where is he?" someone shouted. "Check the boarding house." The stable. They scattered, searching. Eliza pulled Tommy back from the window, mind racing. Rowe would be preparing somewhere, probably checking his weapons, making peace with whatever demons he carried. He wouldn't expect this, wouldn't be ready for. The kitchen door opened. Rowe slipped inside, quiet as smoke. His eyes found hers, read the situation instantly. "Back door," she whispered. "Take Tommy, get to the horses." "They'll have men there already." His voice was calm, but she saw his hand check his gun. "How many?" 20, maybe more. James." "I know." He looked at Tommy, managed a smile. "Remember what I taught you about knots?" The boy nodded, confused. "Good. Keep practicing." He turned to Eliza. "Whatever happens, stay inside. Both of you."
"No."
The word tore from her throat.
"You can't face them all."
"Don't have to. Just have to make them think twice." He touched her face. Just once. Fingertips light as prayer. That's all courage is. Really, making folks pause long enough to remember they're human. He was at the door before she could stop him. Then he was through it, walking into the street like a man strolling to church. The mob converged, surrounding him in a rough circle. "Boys." His voice carried that same easy calm. "Bit early for a social call. Shut your mouth. Killer." Jake hefted the rope. "We know what you are now. Jim Reardon, wanted man. Time to pay for your crimes." "Which crimes? Specifically, want to make sure we're hanging me for the right ones." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Even facing death, Rowe had that quality made men uncertain, made them question. "Does it matter?" Jake pressed forward. "You admitted it yourself. You're a thief and a murderer." "I am." Rowe's agreement took the wind from Jake's sails. "Done things that'll follow me to judgment. But here's the question, what gives you the right to send me there?" "The law?" "The law's in Fort Worth. You boys are just a mob with rope." Rowe's eyes moved across faces, meeting each gaze. "And mobs are cowards' courage. Takes real backbone to look a man in the eye before you kill him. Which of you has that, Jake? You couldn't face me one-on-one when your pride was hurt. Think you can do it now?" Jake flushed. "This is different. This is justice." "This is murder." Doc Winters pushed through the crowd, still in his nightclothes, but carrying his authority like armor. "You hang this man without trial. You're no better than what you accuse him of. Stay out of this, Doc." I will not. The old physician planted himself beside Roe. This man saved my horse, helped raise the Olson's barn, has been nothing but decent since he arrived. Whatever he was, he's trying to be better. Doesn't that count for something? Pretty words won't save him. But Jake's certainty wavered. Then Eliza was there, Tommy at her side despite her efforts to keep him back. She walked through the mob like it was morning mist, taking her place on Roe's other side. You'll have to hang us too, she said quietly. The mob stirred, uncertain. Hanging an outlaw was one thing. The widow Moore and a child, that was different territory. Eliza, get back inside. Morrison's voice held a warning. This isn't your business. It is now. She met Jake's eyes steadily. You want to talk about justice? Let's talk about the justice that left me working off my husband's debts for 3 years. Let's talk about the justice that would send Tommy to an orphanage for the crime of being alone. This man, she touched Roe's arm, has shown more true justice in his actions than this whole town combined. He's a killer, Jake's voice rose. Garrett said, Garrett's dead. The flat voice came from the crowd's edge. Sam, the telegraph operator, stepped forward, face pale. Just got word, found shot on the North Road, but here's the thing, he's been dead since yesterday, since before he ever got to town. Stunned silence. Roe frowned. That's not possible. He was here. We all saw. Man calling himself Garrett was here, but the real Luke Garrett's been moldering since yesterday afternoon. Sam held up a telegram. Sheriff in Amarillo wants to know if we've seen a man named Carl Hutchins. Con artist, impersonates lawmen and bounty hunters, shakes down towns for reward money. The mob deflated like punctured wineskins. Jake's rope dangled loose in his hands. So, someone ventured. Roe's not wanted. Didn't say that. Sam's eyes were thoughtful. Said the man claiming there was bounty was a fraud. Doesn't mean there isn't paper somewhere. But it does mean we nearly hanged a man on the word of a liar. One by one, the mob dispersed. Jake was last to go, rope dragging in the dust. At the end, only Roe, Eliza, Tommy, and Doc Winters remained in the street as dawn finally broke. Well, Doc Winters adjusted his spectacles. That was educational. Think I'll go make coffee. Strong coffee. He ambled off, leaving the three of them standing in the morning light. Tommy broke first, throwing his arms around Roe's waist. I thought they were gonna. The boy's voice broke. Shh. Roe held him close. Takes more than a mob to get rid of me. Partner. Over the boy's head, his eyes met Eliza's. She saw the questions there, the uncertainty. The con man's visit had bought time, but hadn't changed the fundamental truth. Roe Reardon, whoever he was, had a past. It would follow him, follow them, like shadow follows light. Inside, she said softly. Breakfast. They walked back together, Tommy between them, hands linked like a chain. The inn was stirring, guests drawn by the commotion. Morrison stood in the doorway, face unreadable. Well, he demanded, you staying or going? Roe straightened. That depends. Am I welcome? Morrison studied him for a long moment. Man who stands steady when a mob comes calling. Might be the kind of man worth keeping around, but no more secrets. We clear. Clear. Then get inside. Paying customers need feeding, and I suspect Widow Moore could use help with breakfast. It was the closest Morrison would come to apology or acceptance. They took it as the gift it was. In the kitchen, normalcy reasserted itself through routine. Eliza mixed biscuits while Roe tended the fire and Tommy set tables. They moved around each other with newfound ease, as if the night's crucible had burned away pretense, leaving only what mattered. The past isn't gone, Roe said quietly, kneading dough beside her. There might be real bounty hunters, real paper. I can't promise. I'm not asking for promises. She dusted flour from her hands. I'm asking for today, tomorrow, whatever time we're given. That I can give. Tommy appeared with empty water buckets. Doc Winters says facing down a mob works up a thirst. Wants to know if we have anything stronger than coffee.
Tell him Morrison keeps whiskey for medicinal purposes.
Eliza said, He's earned it. The boy scampered off, alone for a moment. Ro caught her hand. You walked into that mob for me. We protect what's ours, she said simply. That's what family does. Family? The word hung between them like a benediction. Outside, Willow Creek was waking up, facing another day of dust and struggle. But inside this kitchen, in this moment, they had found something worth more than gold or safety or even justice. They had found home. The morning crowd was larger than usual, drawn by curiosity and drama. But as Eliza served and Ro helped and Tommy darted between tables, she realized something had shifted. The looks were different now, not dismissive or predatory, but considering they had stood together against the mob, the widow and the outlaw and the orphan, in this hard land. That meant something. Doc Winters raised his coffee cup as she passed. To courage, he said quietly. The real kind. She smiled, refilled his cup, and went back to work. There would be other challenges, other tests. The past might return wearing a different face, bearing real warrants and harder choices. But for now, for today, they had won the right to try. And in a place like Willow Creek, sometimes that was the greatest victory of all. The weeks after the night of the mob passed in a strange peace, like the stillness before spring thunder. Ro stayed, working openly now, no longer the mysterious drifter but part of Willow Creek's fabric. Yet Eliza caught him sometimes, staring at the horizon with that 1,000-yard look, as if waiting for riders who would inevitably come. They were in the garden when he finally spoke of it. Tommy was at school. The teacher had agreed to take him after Doc Winters had a word, and they worked side by side in companionable silence, preparing beds for winter planting. I need to tell you, Ro said, hands still on the spade. About before, about who I was. You don't owe me. I do. He sat back on his heels, dust on his knees, looking younger somehow in the afternoon light. You stood for me against the town. You deserved the truth. So he told her about growing up hard in Texas hill country, father dead before he could remember, mother trying to scratch life from stone, about the men who came one drought summer, took what little they had, left his mother broken in ways that went deeper than bone. I was 15, he said quietly, old enough to hate, too young to do it smart, fell in with the Colson gang. They promised justice, but what they wanted was easier, just taking from others what had been taken from us. The robberies, the running, the slow corruption of grief into something darker. He told it without excuse, each word measured and heavy. The marshal in Amarillo, yes, corrupt as Garrett had claimed, but Ro couldn't claim clean hands in that killing. Self-defense maybe, but he'd gone looking for the fight. 5 years I ran with them, told myself it was survival, but somewhere I'd crossed from surviving to becoming the thing I'd hated. His hands worked the soil absently, as if seeking absolution in earth. Then Tom Colson decided to rob a church, said God owed us too. He'd left that night, ridden out with nothing but his horse and gun, Colson's curses following like bullets. Since then, drifting, working when he could, running when the past caught up, trying to balance the scales, knowing they'd never truly even... There's paper on me in Texas, probably Arizona too, dead or alive in some places. The name Reardon's burned. So I became Ro, but changing names doesn't change what I did. Eliza had listened without interrupting, watching his face. When he finished, she asked the only question that mattered. Do you still believe the world owes you? No. The word came quick and certain. World doesn't owe anybody anything. We make our choices, live with the consequences. All I want now is... He looked at her, then toward the inn where Tommy would soon return. A chance to build instead of tear down. To be the man that boy thinks I am.
Then be that man.
She touched his hand. Earth-stained meeting, earth-stained. The past is a heavy load, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore. He turned his hand, laced their fingers together.
Eliza,
I know. And she did. The words they couldn't quite say lived in the space between them, growing like the seeds they planted, patient and inevitable. That evening brought unexpected visitors. A small wagon rolled into town, driven by a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the mountains. Beside him sat a woman, thin and worn, but with eyes that missed nothing. They stopped at Morrison's, and the man helped a boy down from the back, maybe 12, leg twisted from some old injury. "Looking for James Rowe," the man said. His voice carried the flatness of bad news delivered often. Eliza's heart clenched, but Rowe stepped forward steady. "I'm Rowe." The man studied him with eyes like chips of flint. "Nathan Summers. This is my wife Mary. That's our boy. Daniel." He paused, seeming to weigh each word. "You rode with Tom Coulson." It wasn't a question. Rowe nodded, waiting. "Coulson's gang hit our place 3 years back. Took everything: horses, savings, hope." Summers' jaw worked. "Did worse to Mary. Daniel tried to stop them. They broke his leg so bad it never healed right." The silence stretched taut as wire. Eliza saw Rowe's face change, saw him adding this to his ledger of sins. Tommy appeared at her side, drawn by instinct to trouble. "I wasn't there," Rowe said finally. "Left the gang before that, but that doesn't matter. They were my brothers once. Their sins." He stopped, started again. "What do you want from me?" Summers laughed, short and bitter. "Wanted to kill you. Rode 200 miles for the privilege. Then I get here, find you playing family man. Nearly shot you anyway. But Mary said wait, said watch first." He glanced at his wife, something passing between them. "So we watched. Saw you with the boy there, teaching him. Saw you stand against that mob. Saw you working honest." "Nathan," his wife said softly. Just the name, but it carried weight. Summers sighed. "Here's the thing. Rowe, or Reardon, or whoever you are, killing you won't fix Daniel's leg. Won't give us back what we lost. Mary says maybe there's another way." "Name it." "We're headed California way. Heard there's work in the fruit orchards. Place a man can start over, but the trail's hard. And with Daniel," he gestured at his son's leg, "could use another gun. Another strong back, someone who knows the territory." Rowe understood immediately. Protection and labor for passage. "And after we get there safe, you work our first season, help us get established, call it restitution." "Pa," the boy spoke up, voice cracking with youth and pain. "Don't trust him. He's one of them. The ones who—" "Hush, Daniel." But Mary Summers looked at her son with infinite patience. "People aren't always one thing forever. Sometimes they change. He can't change what he did." "No," Rowe agreed quietly. "I can't, but I can try to do better going forward. It's not enough, I know. Nothing would be enough. But it's what I have to offer." Eliza watched Summers wrestle with it, saw the moment decision crystallized. The man nodded once, sharp. 3 months on the trail, 6 months labor after, then we're square as we're going to get. "Pa," Daniel's voice broke entirely. "You're letting him—" "I'm choosing to live forward instead of backward," Summers said firmly. "That's what your mother wants. That's what we're going to try." He looked at Rowe. "But you run, you betray us, you show false—" "I won't." "Then we leave in 3 days. Be ready." They rolled away, leaving Rowe standing in the street like a man who'd been hit by lightning. Eliza went to him, Tommy trailing uncertain. "You're leaving." The boy's voice was small. Rowe knelt, meeting Tommy's eyes. "I have to. It's a debt that needs paying." "But you'll come back." Rowe looked at Eliza. question in his eyes. "We'll go with you," she heard herself say. Both man and boy turned to stare. "California. I've been saving for it anyway. Tommy needs schooling, real schooling, and—" She took a breath, jumping off the cliff. "Families stay together." "Eliza, you don't understand. The trail's dangerous. And working Summer's land, that's my burden, not ours," she interrupted. "Our burden, our choice, unless—" Sudden doubt assailed her. "Unless you don't want—" He caught her hands, pulled her close enough that she could see the wonder in his eyes. "Want, I want it more than I have words for. But you deserve better than a man who's running from—" "I deserve," she said firmly, "a man who faces his debts, who teaches boys to be good men, who stands steady when storms come. I've found that man. The rest is just geography." Tommy whooped, young enough to see only adventure where adults saw hardship, but his joy was infectious. Roe laughed, the sound rusty but real, and for a moment they stood there in the dusty street. The widow, the outlaw, and the orphan, planning a future none of them could have imagined weeks ago. That night, as Eliza made lists and preparations, Roe worked on something at the kitchen table. She found him there near midnight, whittling by lamplight. Wood shavings curled around his hands like questions. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Too much in my head." He held up his work ring, carved from some dark wood she didn't recognize. Simple, but perfectly round, smooth as water. "Been carrying this piece since Texas. Kept meaning to make something from it. Never knew what until now." Her heart stuttered. "James, I know we haven't, that is, we've never—" He stopped, started again with a wry smile. "I'm better with actions than words. But Eliza Moore, would you let a reformed outlaw court you proper Californias a long way? Plenty of time to decide if you can tolerate me permanent." She took the ring, turned it in the lamplight. Such a small thing to carry such weight. "And if I already know, then maybe you'd wear this as promise, not of what was or what might be, but what is, right now, us." She slipped it on her finger, the wood warm from his hands. "Yes." He kissed her then, careful and sweet, like a man handling something precious he'd never thought to hold. When they pulled apart, his eyes were bright. "I'll earn this," he said. "Every day, I'll earn this." "I know," she said, and meant it. The past was heavy, but the future, their future, was waiting to be built. Together, they could carry both. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, and the moon, in its wisdom, remained silent. But in the kitchen of Morrison's Inn, two people who had lost everything found that somehow, impossibly, they had discovered even more. The morning they left Willow Creek, the whole town turned out. Not for farewell speeches or grand gestures, but in that quiet way of folk who'd learned that words were less important than presence. Doc Winters pressed a medical kit into Eliza's hands. "Mrs." Chen tucked packages of herbs into the wagon. Even Jake Henley showed up, awkward and shamefaced, to shake Roe's hand. "You watch out for them," he muttered, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. "I will." Morrison stood by the inn's door, arms crossed, trying to look stern. "You've left me short-handed. Widow Moore, where am I supposed to find another cook who knows how to stretch a chicken to feed 20? "You'll manage." Eliza adjusted Tommy's coat, though it didn't need adjusting. "You always do." But his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Boy, you mind your manners. And you." He pointed at Roe. "You keep them safe, or I'll come to California myself to settle accounts." The Summers family waited at the edge of town, their wagon loaded and ready. Daniel sat rigid in the back, still radiating distrust. Mary Summers offered Eliza a small smile, the solidarity of women who'd chosen difficult paths. "Ready?" Nathan Summers asked. "All business." Roe looked at Eliza, at Tommy bouncing with excitement, at the meager possessions that represented their entire world. Ready? They rolled out as the sun climbed, dust rising behind them like a blessing or a burial. Eliza didn't look back. She'd learned that lesson already. Salt pillars were for those who couldn't let go. Instead, she watched the horizon, where somewhere beyond dust and doubt, California waited with its promises of orange groves and new beginnings. The trail was everything summers had warned and worse. Days of scorching sun, nights of bitter cold, water that ran low, then lower. Tommy learned to drive the oxen, his small hands sure on the reins. Eliza learned to cook over buffalo chips, to wash clothes in streams barely worthy of the name, to sleep on ground hard as graves. And Row became what they all needed: scout and hunter, protector and mediator. When raiders shadowed them through Apache country, his presence alone kept them at distance. When the summer's wagon wheel cracked, he and Nathan worked through the night to repair it. Slowly, grudgingly. Even Daniel began to thaw. It happened during a river crossing. The current ran high from mountain snowmelt, and Daniel, trying to prove something, fell from the wagon. His bad leg meant he couldn't swim proper, and the water took him fast. Row didn't hesitate. Dove from his horse into the churning brown water, caught the boy just before the rapids. They went under once, twice, then Row's head broke surface. Daniel clutched against him. Together they fought to the shallows, where Nathan pulled them out. Daniel coughed up water, shaking. When he could speak, he looked at Row with eyes that had aged years in minutes. "You could have let me drown. Would have been justice. Maybe." "That's not justice," Row said quietly, wringing out his shirt. "That's just waste. Your life's worth more than evening any score." That night, Daniel sought him out by the fire, didn't say anything, just sat close enough that their shoulders touched. Mary Summers caught Eliza's eye across the flames, nodded once, another debt settling into something like forgiveness. Weeks blended into months. The landscape changed from dust to scrub to the first hints of green. Tommy grew 2 inches, his voice beginning to crack. Eliza's hands, already rough from years of work, grew harder still. But at night, when Row took her hand, the wooden ring warm between them, she felt soft in all the ways that mattered. They were married in a trading post near the Nevada border, the ceremony performed by a traveling preacher who smelled of whiskey and redemption. Nathan Summers stood as witness. Mary held the Bible. Even Daniel managed to smile when Tommy produced rings he'd woven from grass for extra luck. He said solemnly, "Do you, James Row, take this woman?" "Reardon," Row interrupted quietly. "James Reardon. Want to do this with my real name, if that's all right." The preacher blinked, but continued. And so James Reardon married Eliza Moore while the desert watched and blessed them in its vast silence. California, when they finally reached it, was both more and less than dreams. The summer's land was good but hard, requiring back-breaking work to clear and plant. They built 2 cabins side by side, shared labor and meals, slowly became something more than debtors and collectors. Row Reardon now, having reclaimed his name along with his life, worked like a man possessed. 6 months stretched to 8, then 10. Not because Summers demanded it, but because the job wasn't done. When the first harvest came in, abundant beyond hope, Nathan tried to release him from any further obligation. "We're square," he said, counting out wages. "More than square. You've paid whatever debt you carried." But Reardon shook his head. "Got a stake in this now, if you'll have us as neighbors, not hired hands." The 2 men looked at each other, history heavy between them. Then Nathan held out his hand. "Neighbors it is." They bought the adjoining land with Eliza's savings and what Reardon had earned. Built their own cabin as winter came on, Tommy helping with every board and nail. The boy was shooting up like wheat, all knees and elbows and endless questions. On their first night in the new home, as rain drummed the roof, they'd raised themselves. Eliza found her husband standing by the window, staring into the darkness.
Regrets?
She asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. No. He turned, pulled her close. Just thinking how far we've come. That angry boy robbing stages. He'd never have believed this. His hand found her stomach, where new life had just begun to show. Never have believed any of it. Good thing he grew into a better man. Still growing, he corrected. Every day, still growing. Tommy burst in from his lean-to room, soaking wet and grinning.
The roof's not leaking. I told you I could nail shingles proper.
They laughed, all three of them, the sound filling their home like light. Outside, the California rain fell steady and sure, watering the earth they'd claimed together, somewhere in the distance. Coyotes called not lonely now, but wild and free. Later, as the house settled into sleep, Reardon pulled something from beneath their bed, a length of rope, worn smooth from handling. He'd carried it all the way from Texas, he told her, learned every knot and hitch a man could need. But now, only rope I want, he said softly, winding it around their clasped hands, is the one tied to your heart. She kissed him then, long and deep, tasting promise and permanence. When they pulled apart, he tossed the rope into the fire, watching it burn to ash. The past consumed, the future bright as California gold. They made love with the rain singing overhead and their son safe in the next room. Made love like people who'd walked through fire and flood to find each other. And when she lay in his arms afterward, the wooden ring smooth on her finger, Eliza knew that some journeys were worth every dusty mile.
Tell me again, she whispered, about the orange groves.
So he did, painting pictures with words of trees heavy with fruit, air sweet with blossoms, earth dark and rich with possibility. Tommy, drawn by their voices, crept in to listen, curling at the foot of their bed like he had that first night in the shed. They let him stay, this boy who'd made them family before they knew they needed one. And we'll have more children, Reardon continued, hand gentle on her growing belly. Raise them up, knowing they're wanted, knowing they belong. A whole house full, Eliza agreed drowsily.
Enough to pick all those oranges.
Enough to fill the world with something better than we found it. Tommy sighed, content. We already started that, right here. And he was right, in a cabin built by their own hands, in a land that demanded everything but gave back plenty. 3 souls who'd been lost had found their way home. Not to a place, but to each other. The only rope that mattered held them gentle and sure, unbreakable as love itself. Outside, the rain gentled to mist. Inside, the fire burned low and warm. And somewhere between sleeping and waking, between memory and hope, they rested. A widow who'd learned to live again. An outlaw who'd discovered redemption wore work clothes and came with calloused hands. A boy who'd found the family that blood hadn't given him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The land didn't give up its treasures easy, and the past had a way of sending echoes when least expected. But tonight they were complete, whole in ways that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with choice. The only rope they needed bound them heart to heart to heart, in a cabin at the edge of forever, where orange trees waited to bloom and children waited to be born and love. That most patient of miracles had finally found its home. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you're hearing this tale, drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to connect with fellow lovers of frontier fiction. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eliza and James's journey. What touched your heart? What would you have done in their boots? Your stories matter to us as much as theirs.